Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Design Cinema. This is Feng Zhu speaking, and we are at episode 101. We're finally broken through 100. So thank you everyone for the support and all the great message you guys left on episode 100. It was really cool to see some of the messages mentioning that you switched careers because of Design Cinema, or you found out about concept art for the first time because of Design Cinema. So all that stuff is very positive, and it gives me a lot of energy to continue producing these for all of you. So let's jump into 101. So because it's episode 101, I thought, hey, let's go back to the basics. Let's reset a lot of stuff that we've done in the past and kind of revisit the easiest and the most fundamental steps it takes to break into this business. And part of the reason I wanted to do that is because the last 3-4 years, I've seen a lot of portfolios, especially those who are younger, say in the early teens or late teens to early 20s, that are interested in this industry and are doing some, practices and building some portfolios to try to break in. However, about 99% of these are really bad. These portfolios are completely lacking in fundamentals, structures, basically anything that are good for learning, they're skipping. They're doing everything that's kind of bad for learning and hoping that somehow magically they'll become good and work on these AAA games and films. Well, that's not going to happen. This industry is pretty hard for those who follow us for a long time. You've seen all the things we covered. You have to, if you're learning, you have to do these things in baby steps. So today, let's focus on the basics of just sketching. Okay, so I prepared a bunch of PSD files here, a bunch of layers, and let's go through them. And then at the end of the episode, I'll actually do some live, just quick sketches to show you guys how to warm up to this, right? So this whole episode is about sketching, the most fundamental thing to this business, right? Before you do painting, before you do any of that, let's just sketch. Now, I'm not even talking about drawing. I'm talking about sketching. Sketching was a lot more loose. It's more free flow, right? Just get your hands warmed up. So the first thing is, here are the things I see in those 99% of the portfolios, right? Here are the things to avoid when you are learning the basics. Once you have all the fundamentals down, once you start to produce pretty good work, then yeah, all this stuff comes in. But when you're just starting out, that you don't even know how to draw well yet, these are things to avoid because I see them the most in these portfolios, okay? So let me reveal them one by one here. First one, speed paintings. This is just the most topic I ever see in these portfolios. You see horrible speed paintings done usually probably, I'm guessing, within a half an hour to an hour. Totally impatient, totally rushing, no good content, just really just junk stuff. It's like just blah, 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 a bunch of paint marks. You could tell this person is just doing it really quick because they think speed painting is about speed. Speed paintings that once are done well are done by the pros. The reason why they could do it fast is because they got 20 or 30 years experience behind them. So for every brush mark they put down, every line they draw in, that contains 20 years of experience. Therefore, they can make it fast, okay? But when a student gets their hands on a speed painting, they think speed is the only thing they focus on, but they have zero experience doing it. So the result is just horrible. You cannot skip 20 years experience and try to catch up to some pro who's been doing it for 30 years. So speed paintings, unfortunately, is a big thing that a lot of younger kids tend to do, and the results are horrible. It doesn't train you to do anything. Okay, next one. Photo bashing, which is generally related to speed painting, because either they're painting it by hand or they're using a bunch of photographs. And this photo bash is even uglier when you don't have fundamentals because they're using photos that are shot with different lenses. There's zero perspective on anything, no anatomy. There's different texture densities. Just talk about, anything under the sun is under these things. And it's horrendous. They're ugly looking, they're really bad, and they're just completely anti-learning. There's probably the worst thing you could do when you're in the beginning stages of learning, which is to use photo bash, because he skips everything and it's not going to make you any better. Okay, let's go next one. Okay, avoiding fundamentals. Okay, so those two I just mentioned, the top speed painting and photo bash. And the reason why a lot of younger kids are doing it is because they don't want to do the hard stuff, right? They want to do the things that look like what the pros do, but they want to skip all the training that the pros have went under, right? The pros have trained for 20, 30 years. That's why they could do the above two subjects really well. If you want to skip it, then you're not going to catch up to them probably ever. You're just wasting your time. So voting fundamentals is throughout these portfolios. You could tell that they're not putting any effort in it. Right? It's kind of like working out in the gym. You see some people, they get on the treadmill and they basically on walking speed and do it for like 3 minutes and they get off the machine. Like you're doing something, I guess, but it's not going to train you to do anything. It's not going to make you healthier. It's not going to make you more strong. It's not going to build stamina. It's the same thing as doing a speed painting or photo bash. You're kind of experimenting using the same tools and techniques that we are using, but you're not doing it in the hard way. You're not putting any effort into this stuff. You're not sweating over it. You're not frustrated over it. You're just like la la la, right? And you're walking on a treadmill at speed 1 for 3 minutes, right? Does it help? I guess. Is it going to make you better and stronger? Probably not, So that's the same thing as fundamentals, that if you're doing something really hard and it's frustrating and it's taking forever, you're probably doing something correct, okay? All right, let me check the time here. Okay, next one here. Make your own IP. So all those 3 things I mentioned above, they're doing, but yet they want to make their own IP, right? Instead of taking something from the real world and learn something one at a time, right? Take a subject matter that's already been designed, like history stuff or any kind of thing from nature, right? And just draw that or paint it. But instead, it's like, I gotta make my own IP, right? I don't have any fundamental skills. I don't have any design skills. I don't have anything, but I gotta make my own IP. Meanwhile, studios, our AAA studios have 30, 40, 50 concept artists, right? Like a place like Disney have 50, 70 concept artists making a single film. And they're making an IP, and you're one person with 0 skills and you try to make your own IP. But that's what happens all the time. It's kind of interesting to see at these portfolio reviews, like 9 out of 10 people, when they open their portfolios, like, yeah, I'm making my own IP. And you're just going, man, focus on drawing first, or focus on some painting. Do that stuff first before you jump into this huge epic thing, which is the next one here, right? If they're not doing their own IP, they're picking some epic subject matter. Let me get a pen here, okay? That means the subjects that the pros are doing, right? Establishing a new landscape, designing a character from scratch, right? These are epic subjects that pros tend to do in studios. As a student, or not even a student, if you're just jumping in for the first time, do something easy, do something basic, do it right first before you jump to these crazy, insanely difficult subject matters. But unfortunately, a lot of kids fall into this category. Like you look at it, it's like, man, you're pulling off something that even pros have a hard time doing, but yet you're trying to do it. So, I mean, it's good that you're trying, but the result is not the best way to learn. It's slow, it's frustrating, and it's not the proper way to learn the basics, okay? Let's keep going here. Wait, where's my thingy go? Oh, I'm on the wrong layer. Okay. Not using real world references, right? So all the things above equals this one here. They refuse to use real references. In fact, some of the students seem proud. They'll get in line, they'll show me their work and go, yeah, I did all this without reference. And for us professionals, we're like, yeah, it looks like it because it's horrible. You have no understanding of anything. You're just making everything up. Versus pros, every pro, as far as I know, all my friends and all the pros in the industry, we use as much references as possibly can because there's no way you can memorize everything you're ahead, right? So the world is huge. There's so much content. So by supplementing your designs with references, it's going to make your stuff more believable. It's going to make your stuff look better. It's going to give you details, all sorts of positive benefits from using references. And yet students, or those who are learning, is so proud to not use references. Like, I made up everything. I made up all the clothing. I made up everything. And it's like, yeah, it looks like it because it's so bad, right? So don't do that. Okay. And the last one here is immature content, right? This tends to be things like drawing works and elves, or just some pretty girl sitting under a waterfall. This kind of stuff is not for the industry we're in. Now, if you want to become an illustrator and paint really epic paintings and do, say, Magic the Gathering cards and this kind of stuff, sure, that stuff will definitely help you because that stuff is mostly illustration based. The industry that I'm in and what I'm focusing these design cinemas on is for concept design. Our job is to create products. Okay, the drawing is a very small part of it. It's just a communication tool. That is it. The end result is the idea, the product, and this product has to sell. It has to sell to millions of people, possibly, right? So from video games to films, they're all commercial products. So the painting you're doing is not going to be the main selling point at all. In fact, nobody cares. So if your content is just derivative content or things that have no selling point, for example, is just some person standing under a tree and something you've seen a million times, it's not good. Or you're doing designs that are completely driven by the last video games you played. So it comes out very immature. It makes your imagination seem like you're about 16 or 18, somewhere around that age group. And they're not going to let a teen work on a multi-billion-dollar IP like all the AAA games out there and films. So your content has to be mature. Okay, so let's just review these things, right? These 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So these 7 things are something I see the most in early student portfolios. So try to avoid it. Instead, take it one small step at a time and just draw, which is my next slide over here. Okay, start with just sketching. Learn how to do good line art first before you jump into all the things I mentioned earlier. Okay, forget the digital paintings and the photo bash and these epic things. Let's just draw. And even here, these are demos I've done for my students. These subject matters are already too hard. Today, let's just go back to the easiest stuff to draw. Okay, so that comes to my next slide. Difficulty. All right, so I'm gonna create a little bar here because it's kind of important for those of you who have never drawn much before to understand that drawing is not a fair thing. Okay, there are very easy things to draw and there are very difficult things to draw. And I want to explain what those differences are. Okay, so on the left here, we have easy. On the right, obviously, we have difficult. So what is the general barrier between the two? Okay, in my opinion, something that's easy is generally something that gives you a large margin of error. You can make mistakes and nobody knows. The further you go to the right here, then the littlest mistakes is going to show. And this impacts your drawing and early sketching greatly. So what you want to do is you want to pick subject matters that are easy. So if you mess up, even if you mess up like 40%, sometimes up to 50%, it still looks good. That's going to build confidence. That's going to give you the drive to keep going forward. And you definitely don't want to start with something that's extremely difficult over here. So the smallest mistake, it looks bad. And unfortunately, a lot of students generally start here. They pick subject matters that are just so hard and they probably draw for half an hour, get frustrated and give up. Versus, let's go here. And as we show these images to you, I'll explain to you why they're easy. Okay, so in the first column here, the easiest, bam. Okay, so what are these things? Let's zoom in a bit. Okay, so we have spiky rocky mountains, right? This landscape looks exactly like that game that's coming out called, what is it, Death Stranding, right? Very similar. I'm sure they reference these particular areas. I think it's like in Scotland or somewhere else. Very cool spiky mountains. We have insects, skeletons, right? Roots, destroyed post-apocalyptic kind of environments here. Loose clothing. That means these clothing are not tight-fitting on the character. And just pretty cool vehicles like trains and classic cars and so forth. So why are these subjects easier? The reason is because, one, they're mostly organic. They're prone to imprecise lines on their own. That's one. Okay, for example, if you look at this spiky mountain over here, right? Nothing here is a straight line. There's no 90 degrees and so forth. By having this organicness to these subject matters, you could kind of make perspective mistakes. And it's not going to show up greatly. Okay. The other one is these are things that we commonly are not very much familiar with on a daily basis. We kind of know what a bug looks like. We kind of know what a tree looks like, but it's not something you see every day. So therefore, the mistakes you make are not easily picked up by others looking at your work. And therefore, these subject matters here are much easier to draw. And if you look at production of games and films, if something is easy for you to do, most likely it is cheaper to produce for the final product. So if something that's really hard for the concept artist to do, like it takes you a lot of time just to concept it and to make it look good, most likely it's going to be very expensive and time consuming to make for the final product. Okay, it generally goes like that. That's why you see a lot of post-apocalyptic zombie games, right? Because they use this type of thing, right? Imagine you make a mistake drawing and your chair slightly out of perspective or your lines kind of wiggly. Doesn't matter. You just call that's part of the environment. It's fine. So if you're making this into a 3D asset, you can make the same kind of mistakes where you could kind of make sure that the geometry kind of wiggle a little bit. You could texture kind of blend a little bit. It's easy to hide mistakes because the mistakes is part of the flavor of the subject matter, right? Same with loose clothing. If your anatomy is not so good, fine. It's okay. We hide the anatomy under the loose clothing, right? You don't have to get it to be perfect. Things like trains. If you move this thing back a little bit, move the things forward a little bit, nobody knows because nobody really knows what a train looks like. Not this particular model, right? There's thousands of these things on the earth, and most of us are not that familiar enough to know if something is wrong or not. So you can mess with proportions and still make the drawing look good, right? So this is some of the easiest thing you could draw, and I'd recommend if you're just drawing for the first time, start here, which we'll do today. All right, let me grab a coffee here. All right, next. Easy part 2. Okay, now we're getting into some geometric things and something that requires discipline. However, they're still not that hard because these things still are prone to error. Like you can make errors on them and it's not going to be that bad. Obviously, a castle, you have to start plotting out the perspective. But if you mess up a little bit, it's okay, right? These buildings are pretty precisely built, but there are margins in there. It's not as precise as something we'll see later on, okay? Like farmhouses, interiors of history, right? And animals that we know, but yet are not something we see every day, like elephants, rhinos, lizards, and alligators, right? Nobody lives with these things on a daily basis. So if you mess up on the elephant's ear a little bit, like it's a little small, a little big, the eyes a little bit lower, a little bit higher, most people are not gonna know. So as you draw these, you have a lot more freedom to kind of enjoy the sketching process and not worry that you are going to screw up. Okay, so here are the easiest and here are the easy. So these are all things that I recommend you to try, or these kind of subject matters, if you never drawn before. Use these subjects and don't make anything up. Draw from reference, okay, which we'll do today. All right, so let's move on to the medium difficulty stuff. Boom. All right. Now getting to things that are a little hard now, okay? This is something you don't want to be sketching early on because these subject matters are pretty tricky, okay? For example, one of them would be very tight architecture, interiors as well as exteriors. So basically modern things, stuff that's built today or even from anywhere from probably the 1930s, 1940s forward, your architecture becomes a lot more precise. They're using metals now, they're using glass. When this material comes in, the precision and the error of margin of error, is going to be very, very small. So if you're sketching this office interior, for example, your perspective has to be dead on. So if you're not really familiar with the fundamentals at this point, especially with perspective, drawing this is quite difficult. And this is what students avoid, right? Most students don't draw this kind of stuff because it's hard, so they just give up. So here, for example, same, organic twists in geometric forms are really difficult. Like the staircase here, nowadays we'll probably build this in 3D because sketching this is almost impossible. Like a DNA helix, to draw that precisely, it's really, really hard. Okay, a loose sketch maybe, but if you want to make it pretty precise, it's pretty hard. So things like that are getting pretty tricky. I put a little house cat here. The reason for that is like, what's the difference between a house cat and an elephant, right? They're both mammals and they're both animals. What's the difference? The reason why cats, dogs, these kind of animals are hard is because now we are in a territory in which we see these animals all the time. You make a mistake on a cat, like you put the ears down here, okay, you put the eyes like a little bit lower, everyone's gonna look at it and go, hey, something's not right. This cat doesn't look right, right? You can make huge margins of errors on elephants. I'm sure you could put the teeth like way lower and most people won't even catch it. Right? I did this in the past before in one of my episodes in which we took a rhino and moved the eyeballs around. Like you can't tell, it all looks correct. Even to me, I've been doing this for a long time and it still looks kind of correct. It's like you move the eye like basically 20-30% off to the left, to the right, to the bottom, and it looks correct. But you can't do that with cats and dogs because we're so used to the way they look that you mess with their forms, something gets off, right? So for these kind of subject matters, now I gotta be careful because the margin of error is now smaller and smaller. Down here, this is related to the upper area here, this architecture, right? Precision built products gets much harder to do than imprecise things. For example, you go back to medieval times and draw like a shield, right, that has dents in it and it's kind of all handmade. You can make small mistakes in it and it's kind of fine because the tolerances are organic, right? They're not super tight. You do something like an iPhone, while the tolerances here are laser tight, right? These are milled by very precise machines. So if you're sketching something like this, you got to be pretty careful with these sketches. Otherwise, it just looks off. It's going to look like an imitation of, for example, an iPhone than the real iPhone because these companies spend a lot of time making sure these tolerances in here and this spacing, for example, this little I'm not sure what that little thing is there. That little marker here is precisely in the middle, right? Everything is measured. All these little tolerances, the curvatures is all designed. So when you're drawing this, you have to be quite spot on with these tolerances as well, or it comes off bad. So this is getting to pretty difficult subjects here. Now let's get into hard. Boom. All right. So now we're dealing with a human figure, okay? The human body is one of the hardest things to draw correctly, especially a human body in motion, because this is something we are used to seeing the minute you are born. So say you're 18 years old, now you have 18 years of looking at human beings. So the smallest imperfections, like someone walking with a slight limp, right? The smallest limp, you could catch that from a very far distance, right? Like I mentioned in the past, you could recognize your friends simply by the way they walk. So that's how well trained your eyes are. So any kind of human in tight clothing, right? That means their anatomy starts to show. Any motion is one of the hardest things to draw. The good thing is, in the line of work that we do as concept designers, we rarely have to do this. Human beings to us, we don't have to design because they exist anyways. Generally, we're doing clothing, and in the real concept world of mass production concept art, most times clothing is done straight up front view or kind of a slight 3/4 view. They don't have that much perspective on them because it's meant to show off the design. So that's a good thing about being an industrial concept designer, is that we don't deal with human beings that much. Most of the time, say you're on a movie, they'll just give you the photograph of the actor and just draw right on top. So this is more important if you're an illustrator and you're doing, say, the Magic the Gathering cards, in which you have to pose characters and get them into action. Then you have to focus on that. But that is not our industry, which I mentioned in the past. That is the illustrative industry. In the business we're in, we could pretty generally avoid this subject in most cases. Most industrial designers cannot draw human beings. There's a very small percent that can, because it is so hard. So same thing with, say, a horse. A horse and a cat are very similar, in which horses are featured a lot in entertainment. So we also know when a horse looks kind of off, right? You move the eyeballs, you can tell it's kind of off. So horses are just as hard. So a human being on a horse in motion, really hard to do. So I remember that game Assassin's Creed 2, or is it 3? They had horses in it, and the developers were mentioning how hard that was to do. So horses are still very, very hard to do in movies, like to animate a digital horse, really tricky. So anyways, this is getting to the very difficult. The last thing here, the hardest stuff in my opinion to draw, to sketch, are precision man-made objects, similar to the iPhone down here, but here we have like a sports car or a jet or anything that has organic curves but precision curves. So this thing here is really hard to draw. This is the H series BMW, right? Try to sketch that unless you went to industrial design school and drew a lot of cars. This thing here is really hard to pull off for younger kids. And also, of course, human face, right? So I put Chris Hemsworth here, is that Thor, right? Human faces is similar to human bodies, but even more precise, because we generally look at people's faces first before we look at the rest of the forms. So to draw a human being, you have to be very, very precise. The pupil is off just by a tiny bit. The nose shifted a little bit, the eyebrow shifted. You can either make this person have a weird gesture or emotion, or look like they're dead, or they're having a lazy eye. Really hard to do. And that's why in the world of CG, to make a fake human being is really hard to pull off. Even some of the best stuff out there right now, you can still kind of catch that it's not quite right. It's always like that, got that uncanny valley look to it, right? Like they look like zombies. So because the human face has hundreds of muscles in it, a tiny little tweak makes this human have a different reaction, like they're confused or they're angry, they're kind of suspicious, right? Tiny movements, but you're not going to catch that on an elephant, right? So that's why movies like The Lion King and Jungle Book, right, that features animals, they have to really exaggerate those features for you to read what they're doing. But I'm sure a lion to another lion, they could read these small muscles too, but that's not us. We're not the same species, so we cannot read their little tiny gestures that they're doing, but we can for human beings. So drawing human faces nicely is really hard. But going back to what I mentioned earlier, most of the time we never have to do this in this business, because we don't have to design the actor's face. All we gotta do is design whatever they're wearing, their helmets, their earpiece, whatever that is, and all the stuff that goes on top of the human being. So as a concept designer, we could pretty much escape this stuff in most cases. So if you look at this chart as a whole here, okay, if you look at it from left to right, look at the easiest produced and the cheapest stuff is on the left, and the most expensive out here. And that's why science fiction movies and games are the most expensive things to make. They're the most riskiest things to make as well, because they are hard to produce. Cannot make mistakes. Everything has to look polished. everything has to look precise. So, and that's why a lot of indie games, especially if they're not going for a say a stylized look, a lot of early games, they tend to go zombie, they tend to go destroy, post-apocalyptic, because it's a little bit cheaper to produce, right? The hardest stuff is making this type of thing, like big battle suits and really slick armor, all high-tech, futuristic. It's like kind of like this BMW here, right? And put realistic humans inside those suits. That gets really, really hard. Okay. So knowing that, today let's start with the basics, and I decided to choose these roots. Really fun to draw, huge tolerance for mistakes. You can make like 50% mistakes and nothing happens. Okay, so here are some examples. Okay, so I went on Google and gathered a bunch of tree roots. Look how cool these things are, right? They're awesome. I hope that you look at this and get inspired, because if you look at this and go, nah, this is boring, man. I just want to draw really cool stuff from Blizzard. I want to draw big works, or I want to draw stuff from BioWare. Well, if that's what you want to do, your mindset's really not in the right place yet. Okay, as a creative person, you gotta find these shapes interesting, because when I look at this, I'm like, this is beautiful stuff. I want to draw this right now, So I hope you have that, because a lot of the younger kids, I look at their portfolio, it's almost hard to tell if they like drawing, right? It looks like they're just trying to rush so they can work in a game studio, but they don't actually like the process itself. Well, unfortunately, if you don't like the process, you're not going to make it. You're not going to be in the industry if you hate doing drawing and painting. You're going to have to love this and find things like this interesting. Okay, so here are just images I found on Google. Look how cool they are. So here's another one over here as well. Okay, look at this kind of stuff. Look at the one up here. That is just some beautiful stuff, and there's no difference between this and a piece of concept art. You could actually just put this directly in a video game, and it's pretty awesome. You put this in some kind of RPG game that you walk under in a town. Beautiful. You could model it exactly as is, and it'll sell 100%. It is cool. Okay, so don't forget about nature and all these things that exist. Look at this stuff. It's just beautiful stuff. Okay, now let's get into the actual drawing part. Let's give you guys some tips here. Okay, so go back to the first one. All right, so the first thing I generally do is when I look at this, right, because let's just slow it down a bit. Okay, we're going to go into the drawing phase now. We talked about the difficulty of drawings. We talked about starting with basics. Now let's actually talk about drawing this. So let me slow it down by drinking some coffee as well. All right, slow down. First thing to do is see what the horizon line is. Okay, so this has to do with fundamentals of perspective. Now I just make the very easy one. Forget the vanishing points, VP1, VP2, and all that kind of stuff. Just mark a horizon, okay? And you could kind of just estimate this. You don't have to be super precise either. Just know when you're looking up, when you're looking down. Horizon is basically your eye level, okay? Where was this photo taken in terms of the camera position with the photographer's eyes, okay? So here I used the red mark to mark, I'm guessing where it is. It's probably off a little bit here and there, but like I said, it doesn't matter. You could just be kind of in the right zone. For example, if you look at this photo here, the photographer's camera is probably somewhere here. It could be as high as here. It's somewhere in this range, right? But it's definitely not up here, because I could start looking up at this point. Now we want to know horizon line. That way when we start to sketch, you kind of have an idea of how this object sits in 3D space. But because it is a root, there's these branches, we could still be off, and that's why this subject matter is so easy to do, right? But here you could clearly tell that we're looking down here, as these roots go towards camera. And as we look away, it starts to go up, right? And look at the trees in the background, they're going up now. So the horizon is going to be somewhere over here, right? Same with all this. This one, the horizon is actually quite low. Everything here we're looking up. You can see the bottom of these rocks already. So we are below this, this formation here, okay? So that's the first thing to do. It's just kind of mark what the horizon line is, be aware of it, so you don't start drawing into a flat zone. Everything that exists on this planet exists in some kind of three-dimensional space. So especially these objects like this, right? So you want to be conscious of these forms. Next, once you have the horizon, is kind of see the bigger picture, okay? What's the volume these shapes take up? Don't just start drawing details. Okay, start drawing the overall mass first. Get the overall silhouette and the overall form. And you don't have to be precise, which I'll mention in a bit as we start looking at the drawing itself. We just want to get the overall mass. Okay, let's look at the other one here. Same thing here. Find the horizon line. Just roughly estimate where it is at, so you know when you're looking up. All right, here's the blue line. When you're looking up, when you're looking down, up, down. So this one here, that's crossing this little two walls here. It's very evident that we're below this tree, right? Because that's where the photo's taken. So knowing that, we know that this tree is completely above us. Okay. Next, big forms. Okay. So here I used a silhouette to outline where the form actually sits. So that way, when you're sketching, you're aware of the first stage you need to do, which is capture this, whatever I have marked out here in this purple light pink color. Get that down first. Don't start drawing the tiny little details. It doesn't matter at this point because you want to focus on big to small. Okay. Now let's actually take these and draw it. Okay, so here are my tips. Boom. Okay, first, let me get my pen here. I kind of just made this branch up, right? We're not referencing anything at this point. It's just made up some random branches. Okay, so the first tip is get the overall form first. Don't focus on details, just get the overall. There's no line weights or anything at this point. It's just kind of roughly get it in there. And here's some tips for the initial drawing. Okay, you want to relax your arm and let your lines flow, like this sketch here. If you're just starting out, don't worry if this line looks good or not. Don't worry about it. This is gonna take time, okay? Let's say at least 6 months to a year before you get comfortable. So you don't expect good results on your first day trying this, okay? It's gonna take a while. But it's good to be in a good habit of being loose with your arms. So you're drawing with your elbow, okay? You're not drawing with your wrist. So that's why after so many years of doing this, I have no carpal tunnel or anything like that because I'm using the elbow muscles. This muscle is much, much bigger than the one you have in your wrist. So I'm not moving my arm like this. I'm moving my entire elbow and get everything forward here. I'm pivoting on this. So by doing that, for example here, right, you can see this line is very fluid. If I do this with my wrist, this is done with my wrist right here. Okay, I move my wrist left and right. Okay, this is moving my elbow. Okay, wrist staying still. This line here is a lot more fluid. It doesn't make my arm get painful because you're moving a major muscle group here. So, and it helps you just kind of keep everything nice and fluid. And that's the way I recommend to draw as well, right? Avoid drawing the wrist, except for very small details. I rarely move my wrist. And you definitely want to avoid this as well, which is kind of this dead lines. Okay, all the lines are the same length. You're drawing very stiff, like right? This is pretty ugly, and that's not sketching anymore. Now you're just making a sticker. Okay, so try to avoid drawing this. Looser in the beginning, but drawing a lot will automatically make you precise over time. So if you practice drawing this way and draw another 1,000 drawings, 2,000 drawings, okay, I'm not kidding, literally 1,000 drawings, literally 2,000 drawings. When you get to that kind of mileage, you're gonna automatically start to get more precise. If you do this from day one, even after 1,000 images, you might actually get worse. Your drawings tend to look too tight and you're gonna have a hard time loosening up. So it's better to start a little bit more loose, a little bit more fluid, and then let itself get tighter and tighter over time. Okay, so that's step one, get the overall. Step two. Okay, now we focus on line weight. So here are my tips for where to add line weight. Okay, so let's zoom in now here. So these are general tips for line weight. Okay. One is areas of shadow. Okay, we are doing a line drawing, so we don't have rendering or anything like that. But in general, the shadow is going to fall towards the bottom. Okay, in most cases, the sun is above us. We're pretty used to seeing things light above, dark on the bottom. So on the bottoms of these shapes, you could tend to kind of indicate where the shadow is going to turn in, or the form is going to go into shadow. And I tend to add a little bit of line weight in those areas. That's one. The other one is areas of form overlap. For example, this form here is going over this line here. So here is an overlap. So we tend to make the line weight a little bit darker in any areas in which one form is overlapping another. So for example, here, we're seeing it here as well. So this branch is in front of this branch. So we made this line slightly darker. But notice this tapered off line. We don't want to make this whole thing, like for example, we don't want to make this whole thing dark. We want to taper it off. So this area here is where the overlap is happening. Over here, there's no overlap. Hold on a second, let me change my pen to red again. Over here, there are no overlaps. So I don't need to make the line super thick because there's nothing the lines are fighting against, okay? So this is generally where I'm putting that. Let's go next one. Corners and creases. So this is similar to areas of shadow in which two forms are starting to turn a corner or just starting to crease together. So let's look for example of that. So for example here, this is a corner, a V shape here. This is another corner. And let's see, this is a shape here that's twisting. So this is related to shadow, sometimes also related to screen space occlusion, right? So if you play video games, you've seen the ambient occlusion like SSAO, right? Similar effect in which when a shape is going into another shape, you tend to have an area of darkness, right? So in video games, we refer that as ambient or space occlusion, right? Or ambient space occlusion or something like that, SSAO. Okay, so we can indicate with line weight as well. Another one is areas with weight. Okay, so this is literally like a physical weight. If this thing is heavy, for example, a box. Okay, right now this drawing with the same line weight, right? But a box is heavy towards the bottom. So we can make this line a little darker and it kind of just gives it a visual weight. So say a window frame. Here's a window frame, right? With the frames here. Boom, boom. Now, if I put on the bottom one that serves as a shadow, it also serves as the weight of this object. It tends to go to the bottom. So here's how this windowsill will be drawn if it's a straight front view. Okay, so that's it. So that's the line weight. And this kind of stuff you can actually see on blueprints of architect drawings. They actually indicate line weight sometimes these really nicely drawn blueprints, especially look back to some of the early blueprints from the 1800s, really beautifully done because they'll put line weight into it and it covers pretty much everything here. Okay, and the last one here is start with the focal point. Okay, so I indicated here what the focal point means. That means the area you want the viewer to see first, and we expand that out. You don't want this line weight to be everywhere because it creates too much of a random focus. So in this case, because it's a branch, I want the focal point to be sort of in the middle here and kind of go down to the bottom and a little bit on the top here and kind of just soften out. Okay, so notice on the edges here, all the lines here are essentially the initial sketch here. Nothing has changed because I want to keep these light throughout the entire sketch. I'll never touch them again. The area of focus is always here, and this is where the detail is going to come in as well in the second stage there. Okay, so next one, let's start. Okay, now we're starting to put some contour lines and details. Okay, so let's just review here. So that's the first stage, second stage, line weight, third stage, detail and contour. So contour lines, which I put here, these curved lines, they're not necessarily on the original reference. Well, in this case, there is no reference, I just made it up. So contour lines are generally lines are indicating the form turns. So in this case, because they're round branches, I'm putting a lot of contour lines here. So the form's trying to read. Keep this in mind. Our job is to communicate a design. Our job is to communicate using a drawing. The end result is not this. This is just a communication tool. So oftentimes, for example, if this is going to go to the next person in line, which is a 3D modeler, they have to understand what's going on in your forms. So here, for example, if I just give this to a 3D modeler, they could kind of model it, but they're not going to really see clearly what's happening here. With the contour lines added, now this form here starts to have dimensional space, simply due to the contour lines we added. So contour lines are there to help describe form. So again, they're not necessarily on the reference image themselves. I'm adding it on my own. So you could do this with animals, you could do it with products. Like oftentimes, for example, if they're drawing, say the iPhone we talked about earlier, right? If you just leave it like this, it's very hard to read. This looks like a cracker, it's flat. But if you add a contour line here, all of a sudden we have a radius corner, which is here. Okay, so this is something oftentimes you see on product drawings in which they'll indicate using a contour. And in most cases, the 3D modelers know the difference between a contour and a non-contour. We call a form line versus a contour line or a cut line. Okay, so these things are getting a little complicated. We'll talk about that maybe a little bit later, the difference between, say, cut, form, and contour. Actually, contour and form lines are pretty similar. Say a cut line is actually something different. Say a seam on a car's door. That is a physical cut line that exists on the product itself, versus contour lines might not exist. It just shows how the car door is formed. So we'll get to that later. But contour lines help to add some details, and it just kind of makes everything look kind of nice. Okay, adds that extra level of finish. Okay, and the last one here, boom. Okay, is that we finish this sketch with some light marker. And notice the marker is also going the same direction as my focal point, right? It tends to kind of expand from the bottom outwards. So the darkest area is here, and it gets lighter and lighter until it kind of just disappears off, okay? And I'm still using the same technique I used 20-something years ago using traditional markers, which I'll show you guys in the next sketch there. Using the same concept, which is starting with something very light, like a light gray, 10%, 15%, and slowly build it up. So what you could do is you can actually Photoshop, pick a gray that's about, I could do it here, just show you guys. Okay, so I'm gonna pick a gray at 50%, okay? But I set my opacity to just 30%. So that way I could go in there and draw like this. And then if I want it to be darker, I just simply go on top of it because my opacity is only at 30%, right? Up there, I don't know if you guys can see, it's 30%. So I could keep building this up, and this works almost exactly like how real markers work on paper. Okay, so you can keep building this up. If I keep going here, ultimately I get to about 50% gray, which is here, down here, right? So this is how I'm doing these washes as well. That's why I can see band lines in here, meaning that you can see the seam lines, right? So you can see it all through here. You can see there. There's a V right here. But it doesn't matter. You'll see this in the real markers as well. When you look at Prisma marker renderings, you can actually catch it. And it kind of adds to the overall texture. If it's too smooth, like an airbrush, it actually makes the sketch a little bit fuzzy, in my opinion. So I like to have the marker lines show up a little bit. So they're everywhere here. You can see it here, here. It's kind of part of the style of this industrial-like style that goes back to the 1970s and probably even earlier. So if you go back to the 1970s Star Wars drawings by Joe Johnston and Ralph McCurry and all these classic concept artists from back in the days, you can actually see this technique hasn't changed much in the last 40, 50 years. Okay, all right. Let's go next one. So that's the tip. One more note on focal point. Okay, so if you have a question on focal point, in this case, this is not a living thing. I mean, it is a living thing, it's a plant, but it doesn't have any living features like eyeballs and nose and stuff like that. So my focal point, I tend to just kind of choose a spot and let it be there. Now, anything living, like anything from a bug to a fish to a human being, the face is always going to be the focal point. So that's where you start most of your details out and your line weights. It all goes from the face and radiate out. So on the bug, it's going to be the little compound eyes, the mouth, and all the little front legs, and then kind of just expands outwards. Okay, for a human being, obviously, it's the face area and goes back all the way down. So your feet is generally the least concern of line weight and detail. So it's all around the eyes, the nose, and so forth. Okay, let's take that concept and go into our little sketch demo here. Boom. So let's draw this guy, okay? And you guys, I'll put all this on a blog somewhere after I'm done with Design Cinema, so you can find these references. So you don't have to find it yourself. You can just use these ones. They're great. You can use them, and they're all just from Google image search. Okay, so let me give you some tips on this before we actually draw it. Boom. All right. First, here's our goal, okay? First thing is we're not doing a one-to-one copy. This is pretty important to understand here, okay? The goal here is not to just draw everything perfectly, exactly like a photoreal, match everything perfectly. That's not the point. The point here is to loosen up your arms and your wrists to learn how to draw and how to sketch, to fall into this zone of comfort as you get into more difficult things, right? It's kind of like going back to that training thing that in the gym, right? So we don't want you to be walking at speed 1 for 3 minutes. That's not gonna do much. What we want you to do is have a small run. So let's say 10 minutes at speed 5. So you're getting a small sweat, but it's not the best workout. It's not the most intense, but you're getting into it, right? And your footsteps could be off a little bit. You don't have to be super precise. Maybe your movements are a little bit off. It's fine. Same thing with doing a sketch. If you're doing a one-to-one copy, you're actually using a lot of time in areas that's not that important for sketching. Excuse me. So what we want to do is capture the overall form, but you could be off, way off, and it's okay. And that's why we chose the roots, right? And that's why we didn't choose Thor, the Chris Hemsworth guy, because that kind of drawing, you got to be super precise. You have to do a one-to-one copy where the human being don't look right? It's gonna look like an off version, like his long lost brother or something like that. So that's why we choose these easy subjects. Okay, next we'll learn to relax, which I mentioned about. We want your muscles, your arms to just get used to sketching. Okay, have that kind of relax. I have my coffee. It's a nice day. I'm just kind of free flowing. You don't want to be sitting all tight and like this. I remember learning how to fly my airplanes a long time ago. You sit in the cockpit. Generally, the teacher knows if you have a lot of experience by simply how your hands hold the yoke of the airplane. So you look at the pros, they're kind of gently holding the plane. They want the plane to fly. So sometimes they're flying with the pinky on the yoke, just super gentle moving the plane. Versus students who are like grabbing the yoke, like going to squeeze to death. because we're nervous. We're thinking, oh, it's gonna crash, right? But the more confidence you gain, the more you start to trust the airplane and you start flying it just by touching or making minor adjustments. So same thing here. The early stages of drawing, you tend to see that they're grabbing the wacom super tight. Everything here is starting to hurt, right? Versus pros, it's just like la 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 la. Like I'm barely holding my pen on the wacom. Later, I'll show you guys a little bit of the my settings in Photoshop as well as wacom, so you guys can see what I'm using to draw. Because again, I don't have any pain in my wrist. I don't have any health issues with my arm, even though I've been drawing for long time. So if you count my kid days, we're talking about what, 35 years or something of drawing, and I don't have any carpal tunnel. And that has to do with the way you sketch. You have to do this correctly. Okay, let's do this. Okay, next one, learning line control and flow. So these two are related. And we're not getting confidence. And that's why, again, we're choosing this kind of subject matter. You could draw this, have fun, and gain a lot of confidence versus trying to draw Thor and mess up and go, screw this, man. This is way too hard, right? Don't start drawing Captain America and Thor and everybody. Let's start with something simpler so you gain confidence and be happy. And most important, you gotta have fun. Okay, so when I was doing this episode, finding these references, man, I was totally into it, and I'll give you some tips on how to do that as well. It just shows you how much I love this industry. This stuff is fun. I got work to do. I got all these things I gotta work on. But when I'm doing this, I'm like, dude, this is fun. This is why I'm doing this, right? So, anyways, all right, here's some more tips here. So one of the things I do a lot is even as a kid, I've been doing this, is to pretend, give yourself a role. You guys all play RPG games, right? So when I was drawing these drawings, I just pretended that I was like an illustrator or some kind of artist in the ancient video game, or where Lois and Clark back when they were exploring America, right? Put yourself in that role and just have fun with it, versus like, oh, I'm a student and this is for homework and this is so painful, I gotta draw. So imagine you're on like on James Cook. Is it James Cook, that the captain, right? Imagine like he hired you to be on the voyage for the next 2-3 years to draw all the plants of all the new islands you discovered, right? Where say Lois and Clark going across America, going through the Blue Ridge Mountains and Colorado Rocky Mountains, and documenting the landscape and stuff. Just pretend doing that. How fun is that, right? Got your backpack, you got your camping equipment, and you have a little sketchbook, and you're just capturing the nature. So that's what I did when I was drawing these. Just pretended I was one of those characters, okay? Next, don't do this for social media. Please don't have a goal of, I cannot wait to finish this, I could put on Facebook and get a bunch of likes. I mentioned this numerous times. Don't do this for social media. This is for you. The better you become in this industry, the more cool stuff you work on, naturally you'll gain fans. You'll have people liking your work. But if you're doing it for that reason, you're totally wrong, right? You're doing it because you want to work in this industry, you want to work on cool products. That, if you accomplish that goal, everything goes after will come on its own. You don't have to worry about it. It all comes naturally, okay? Making good living, having good jobs, it all comes because you have this skill. If you're only doing it because you want to gain fame, then most likely you're not going to make it, okay? Do this because you like doing it, not because of social media, okay? So be slow and patient. So this mentioned numerous times in past design cinema. This will take years to perfect. If you're just starting out, it's going to take maybe 6 months to see some difference, 1 year to see a huge difference, and you might be doing this for 3-4 years until you become very confident. But that is the time it takes. You can't skip this. If we could skip it, every single school on the planet will teach it if there's some kind of secret formula. But there isn't. This is a skill-based job. It's a physical skill-based job. That means you got to practice, right? So there's not even something like, at least in training, you could take drugs. You could take like steroids and get all buff. But but in this industry, you can't do it. I guess photo bash might be the cheat. But in most cases, if you want to learn how to draw, you're gonna have to do the traditional way. Oh, and by the way, I guess you could cheat by tracing. Okay, you could trace this stuff. But if you're doing that, that's pretty much, I guess, tracing is the steroids of this industry. So you could do that. You could draw a pretty nice drawing by tracing something, but it's going to add nothing to you have no skills. You know what I'm saying? It looks nice, but on the outside, but there's nothing underneath it. So don't trace it. This is for yourself. So don't do that. Okay. Sketch it. Even if it's a horrible drawing, don't trace it. Okay, remember, good results come first, not speed. Okay, so if a sketch takes you a whole day to draw, then fine, it took a whole day. Don't try to do it because it's fast. Okay, don't try to compete with the pros. Okay, so let's run through the steps here. So as we talked about earlier, first stage, get the overall form. Okay, so that's this here. And this drawing here is totally probably off. Even if looking here, like my negative space is quite off, right? Because that's besides the point. It's fine, okay? You can see that I marked a very light horizon line here. okay, similar to where the horizon line is marked here. So that way I kind of know what's up, what's down, you know, where's my eye level at. I tend to do this for pretty much every sketch I do. It doesn't matter if it's man-made or organic. I put a horizon indicator, okay? So big sketch first, don't focus on details. Next, line weight, okay? Exactly what we mentioned earlier. Form, then line weight. So you can see the line weight is adding areas of overlap, right? These are all form overlaps. Under areas, shadows, for example, are all in this here, right? Focal point is going to be here. The focal point is this area here and expand outwards. So next, we have the contour lines and more areas of darker line weight as well as shadow indication come in. So now this sketch is starting to take form. It's almost towards like the final stages here. Remember, we're doing a sketch here. We're not doing a perfect illustration. We're not doing a rendering of this. We're doing a sketch, okay? In my definition, a sketch and a drawing are different things, okay? The way I like to define it is a drawing is tend to be a little tighter. A sketch is a lot looser. So this here is a sketch. If we make this spend maybe another 3-4 hours on it, maybe even 10 hours, it becomes a drawing, in which, in my opinion, drawing is a lot more tighter. It's now a finished product. It is something that is client showable. A sketch is always like an in progress type of thing, right? So this one here is towards the end of a sketch. Next, final details added in, right? So some of the background indicator stuff, a little bit more line weight. They can see clearly the indication of the focal point, which starts here in the middle and kind of branches out. Oh, branches out. That's a pun right there. As it branches out towards the sides there. Okay, and finally we add some markers. Right, very light gray wash here. And let me run through what tools they are. So of course this is done in Photoshop, but traditionally, how this works pretty much exactly the same. In fact, this technique comes from traditional markers. So I'll show you the tools that I used to use back in the days, right? So to do the actual marker that you see here, I used to use Prismacolor Gray, okay? The brand's a marker. Now, of course, you don't have to worry about this because you're doing it in Photoshop. But if you do want to try this on paper, it's exactly the same kind of skills. It doesn't matter. In fact, if you want to draw on paper, I encourage it because it's quite cool. So Prisma markers are, I use the warm grays as well as the cool grays. It's up to you. They come in warms and cools. So I generally use them in odds. So if you're going to buy this set, I generally never bought the sets. What I buy is in odds. So what I buy is, say, 10%. Then 30%, 50%, 70, 90, and then black. So here, how come they have like 11? Anyways, maybe they have a 0. So anyways, I buy then the black one. Okay, so let's just put it here, 10, 30, 50, 70, 90, and 100% black. Okay, so that generally, so if you do this, you can save some money, right? So I don't have to buy the 20 and the 40 or whatever, because the difference between 10 and 20 is pretty light. You don't need it. So I wanted a jump between 10 and 30. So, and I usually bought like a bunch back in the day. It's like a box of 10, 10% would be like a box of 10 and a box of 30, box of 50. And I run through these pretty quick. So actually Photoshop saves you a lot of money because Prismacolor, I think back in the days, it was running about 300 USD a month, just a marker cost. So that's not cheap. And I think that might be the low estimate. I think it's much higher than that because each of these cost, I can't remember, $4 each. So a box of 10 is, we're talking about $40. So 40, right? 3 of these are 120. So this set, you're looking at 240 just to get that. And I'll run through this probably within a week or two. So yeah, that's about right. So each month is about 300 to 400 USD just for markers. So anyways, so that's the gray wash. Now comes the Prismacolor white pencil. So this pencil I used to add highlights. So the next one you'll see, I actually didn't add it here. You'll see in my next sketch here. So I used to add the little highlights using a Prismacolor pencil. And next is gouache. Okay, gouache is a paint with a very fine brush here. This is a kind of a one brush tip. Okay, so gouache, this white in gouache is very, very bright. The paper you buy, in most cases, even if you buy white paper, that white is not 100%. It's a little bit off. It's about a, maybe if you look at here, it's about this number here. It's just almost bright, but it is off just a tiny bit. But if you buy white gouache, this white will actually show off on the paper. Then it makes your paper look like it's gray. It's pretty weird to see actually when you put this white gouache on white paper. You're like, hey, my paper is not 100%, right? So this will show off the tiny highlights that we do last. So let me show you what this looks like on the next one here. So this is kind of the overall sketch, right? Practice that. So let's go back to the timing thing. If this takes you a whole day to do, that's fine. Okay, don't do speed. So here, hey, don't do speed. I'm doing a lot of puns today. Anyways, This sketch here took me about 25 minutes or so to do. So again, go for quality. Don't rush this kind of stuff. A good sketch takes time. Okay, you're not after the speed, you're after the quality. So don't benchmark your speed. Okay, so next one here, I just drew a couple examples. The one I just did, I put it here, and you can see in the middle. I just added a few more. These are all from the references. Here's a tree that was above the two walls, right? That were looking up at it. This thing was awesome. This is one of the sketches over here. Let me see if I can find the rest of that. That was this guy here, I think. Where is it? This one here. Oh, there it is. Look at this thing, right? I think it's a fallen tree. So you can see actually the trunk basically towards into the perspective here. Look how cool this form is, right? So when I look at things like that, I just want to draw it so bad. So let's go back to our examples here. So that's what that was. So here's this one that we just did, right? See the contour line, same thing, line weights. And this will be a nice little page of a sketch. Then you do another one, another one, another one, do hundreds of these, right? Hundreds. I'm not joking here. You gotta do hundreds of these. And you will start getting better and more comfortable with drawing. So let me point out what the Prismacolors are, right? See the little white marks here? That will be done with the Prismacolor pencil, white, okay, on top of the marker, so it shows up. And notice I'm following the same contour lines. Let me delete that here. I found the same contour as the tree. Okay, so I'm not going here and just go cut, right? Carefully done, slow it down. Okay, even for a loose sketch like this, you want to be patient and careful. Okay, so you can see all that. So anytime gouache goes in, will be the hottest highlights. For example, maybe here's, I'm sure on YouTube you can't even tell the difference, but in certain areas like here, down here, okay, this will be done if this is traditional with the white gouache. So this will pop out on the white paper, okay? But we use tiny dots of this gouache. So you don't want to overdo your highlights, you want to do a little bit. So these highlights are actually added in. I can show you the layers actually. Okay, let me see where my line drawing is. Here's a line drawing. Okay, let me zoom out here. So here's initial line drawings for all the rest of it. So this whole page took me, I think each one took about anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes. So looking at about an hour and a half, somewhere there of drawing. And that's me drawing for a long time. So if you're doing this might take you easily a day, maybe 5-6 hours. That's normal. Okay, don't worry about the speed. I have to keep mentioning this because I teach a lot of students, and a lot of students want to rush through this. They think speed somehow makes you better. No, it does not. Good quality makes you better. Okay, slowly build it. So anyways, here's that sketch. And what is this one? This one has nothing on it. Okay, this is a first light gray wash. You might not even show up on YouTube. So this is pretty much like a 10% marker. Here now I'm adding the next one, which will be a 30 to a 50% marker here. I'm turning it on and off so you guys can see the difference. Here comes in the 50 to 70% marker. So you can see to indicate where the branches are versus the rocks. Okay, so that's popped in. And let me just zoom in here so you can see the Prisma white color pencil come in. So here's the pencil, right? So I did it in the exact order I would do it if this is traditionally drawn on paper, okay? Everything's the same process. So I like to do things the traditional way because I learned it that way. So I just treat Photoshop purely as a tool. So I know there's a lot of younger concept artists out there who are completely digital and they use a lot more brushes, tools, and so forth. That's all fine. It doesn't matter. But if you're just starting out, I do recommend just doing everything the most basic way. Don't try out fancy brushes and fancy everything. Just do things the traditional way. Draw it, marker it, a little bit of highlights, you're done. Okay, because page like this looks great. This is fine, and this will help you really get better at this stuff. Okay, so lastly here I'm going to show you guys just a few sketches of that I've done in school as students to teach students. You can see this one here on the left, this little spaceship was done in 2012, right? This is 7 years ago. Okay, we're coming on 8 years now on this drawing, but it still holds up. Okay, a nice line sketch done well will last you a lifetime. You guys can go back and look at Sid Mead's drawings, Frank Frazzetta's drawings from 50, 60, 70 years ago. They still look good today because a good sketch done well will last through the ages. A bad photo bash, a bad speed painting will look horrible, or it looks horrible when you start it, and it'll look even worse when you get better at it and go back and go, holy cow, I can't believe I did that. Okay, a good sketch really will hold up for the entire lifetime. So, and that's why a lot of traditional art directors, guys like myself or a little bit older, we love sketches because it shows who you are. It shows you the core skills you have. You cannot cheat this stuff unless you're tracing, I guess. But if you're not tracing, you really can't cheat a sketch. The form, the line flow, everything is part of you. Okay, it's very easy to identify who somebody is by their sketches. It gets much harder to identify when you start to go into 3D and everything's rendered. You cannot tell which concept guy did what because the technique is almost the same, right? So sketch is a very raw thing. So here are some examples of just vehicles. Couple more. These are from school days for students, right? So you can see this bug vehicle, just having fun. Sketches really is about expressing yourself. It's about just finding the comfort zone. So these are all the things I like to draw: big bugs and farm vehicles and post-apocalyptic craziness. So I always put bugs and stuff into my designs because I like it. Right, here's some more organic stuff. Skeleton studies and Dead Space looking dudes. Here's some guys riding some pigs. Right, here's some made-up creatures. Here's some real elephants and rhinos and a made-up rhino thingy, fantasy rhino. Yeah, big turtles. Yeah. Notice I'm choosing subject matters are all a little bit easier, I guess, except for the human. But the human's a skeleton, and then I put loose clothing on it, right? See, this is not body type, so it gets a bit easier because these are things I want students to try out. These are all things that are on the left side of the difficulty bar. Okay. Here, I'm showing actually an industry thing to show you how important line drawings are sometimes. So this one goes way back. Look at the dates on this one. This is done in July 03. So this is 16, almost 17 years ago. So this is done for Star Wars Ep 3 for General Grievous. So I had to do a lot of breakdowns for him, showing how his arms break up because he had to hold like 4 lightsabers, right? It's a very complex thing. And this was done for IOM. So that way the modelers there knows how to break this stuff and how to rig it. So it was almost drawn like a medical illustration. So using colors to indicate different parts of his body and using line drawing to kind of just do it. Nowadays, this is all being done in 3D, I think, but this is when Photoshop was still in the early stages of being used to do digital work. So 16 years ago, that was a long time ago. Anyways, but it still holds up today because line drawing done well, like I repeated a million times already in this episode, line drawing done well will last a lifetime. They'll always look kind of cool. So I actually enjoy looking at some of these sometimes because you don't see this much these days. Everything's so digital now. And this is drawn on paper, by the way. This is not done in Photoshop. This is done on 8.5 by 11 paper. So anyway, so that's that. Okay, what is this one here? All right, so now let's actually start sketching. So let me pause the video here so I can save this, and I'm gonna go through a little bit of my brush settings and just initial things to get you warmed up in Photoshop. All right. All right, so now I'm going to show you guys some basic setups of what I use to draw digitally, so you can see what tools I'm using and what my brush settings are. Okay, so let me get a blank canvas. Okay, so here's a blank canvas. Okay, let's switch my pen to, let's use black for now. Okay, first let me go over my Wacom settings. Okay, so let me get control panel open here so you guys can see that. All right, so I'm in Windows 10, so it doesn't matter, Windows 10, Mac, whatever you're using, it's all fine. So I'll go to a Wacom tablet so you can see my settings. So I actually leave my tip on right in the middle here, right? So if you find that you're pressing too hard on your pen, you can always scale this one back a little bit to soft. So this will start to pick up the slightest pressure on your tablet. So I just leave mine in the middle. I'm kind of used to it, so it's fine. Notice I'm still using Intuos 3. I noticed some people are asking if I use a Cintiq and whatnot. No, I just still use Intuos 3. This thing is about, I think, 10 years old or something. I don't know. But I still just like it. There's nothing wrong with it. If it ain't broke, right, why fix it? So I use 3s everywhere. I use my office, use my home. Everything's a 3. I know the newer Wacoms might be much better, but I don't have any problems with the 3s here. Right, so this one here, I can see here, if I just leave that open, if I just barely press, you can see the lines are sort of coming out. Obviously, you guys cannot see me pressing light or dark, but I'm barely pressing and it's picking it up. Now, if I put this back onto here, if I'm barely pressing, because you can see the cursor is probably moving, but nothing's showing up. So I have to actually press a little bit harder for the lines to show up here. Okay, so this is a total pure personal preference. You have to play with it. I'm just so used to having set on regular, so I could generally go through here. You can see, right? So if I press a little harder, this is the result. Okay, by the way, I'm making this form purely with my elbow, not with my wrist, right? So I'm moving my elbow back and forth and it just naturally creates this. Okay, so or like things like this. This is just elbow movements. Okay, we'll talk about that in a little bit here. Okay, let's go back here. So that's my Wacom setting. Everything else is all default. Everything is default. Make sure your mapping here is set to force proportions. So I have two monitors here. So you can see I'm only forcing it to the left monitor. My right one's just I don't put my Wacom on it. I get to the right monitor using my mouse. So make sure you have this force proportions, because I've seen a lot of students don't have this on, because by default, I believe this is off. I'm not sure about the new drivers, but at least the Intuos 3s, by default, this is actually off. When it's off, it's not proportional to your monitor. So if you have a wide screen, Wacoms are like 16 by 9, looking at it right now. I think it's a 16 by 9. So you're going to be really off, and it's going to be awkward drawing it. So make sure that you force proportions. So the Wacom, you might lose a little bit of Wacom space as a result. For example, if this is your screen, right? This is your screen. A Wacom is actually, let me switch color here. A Wacom is 16 by 9, so this is the surface you draw. I'm talking about the old Wacom, yeah? So I'm not sure about what the new ones are. So it's like this. So if you don't force proportions, then the movement is completely awkward. But if you do force it, you're gonna get a area lost on the left and the right. Okay, so you're gonna lose the left and the right, but it's not a big deal. Okay, so let me get rid of that. Next, let's look at my Photoshop settings. So the brush I use, this I'm sure will get asked in the comment section. What brush do you use, right? To just keep it the most basic. So I use pretty much 2 brushes to draw everything I do here. One is the default chalk. So if I make this really big, this is what the brush looks like if I make it really big. This comes with Photoshop. Let me make it different color here. Okay, this brush came with Photoshop 4 or something. It goes way back. I have this brush set for years. But if you shrink it really small, this is a pixel of 10. If you can see here, okay, at 10 pixels, this brush is pretty nice. It flows pretty well on the page here. So I use this to draw like all those trees and branches is done either this brush or another one. I can't even tell the difference. They're pretty much the same. So this is one of it. The other one here is this calligraphy brush that also came with Photoshop, probably version 4. So by default, if I make it big, it looks like that. So if I move it, it looks like something like that. Okay, so that's really big. So, but if you shrink it small to a size 10, the line here flows really well, as you can see here. Okay, so these are default brushes. You don't have to download these from the internet. They just comes with Photoshop. You probably go dig through. Maybe it's called legacy brush nowadays. I'm not sure. You have to go dig through and find it. So one's called a chalk. The other one's a calligraphy brush. And I didn't change any of the settings. For example, you go to brush here. Okay, these are all default. I don't change any of this kind of stuff. So like I said, I like to work in default everything. So I'm not I think the newer generation is all about playing with the coolest tools and the coolest settings and messing. There's all custom settings. For me, I'm just used to default. This has to do with the line of work or the time period I got into the industry, because in the early days, you used to work with other clients' machines. They'll call you in, say for a freelance job, you're in there for a month and they have a machine set up for you and you cannot change you can't change anything, right? Everything's secured. You can't change settings. You can't install software. If you're working for any big companies like Electronic Arts, Ubisoft, they're all the same. So they have a workstation set up with Photoshop and some kind of Wacom, and it's as is. You cannot copy brushes on there. You cannot copy things off of it. It's completely a secure computer. So you get used to just working with whatever the clients give you. So if you're very picky and go, I have to use this brush, well, then you're just causing trouble. The company has to be, okay, well, get their IT down here and they have to like release the rights to it and, blah, 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 blah. So I just got used to working with anything default. So I don't change any settings or anything, because I've been in studios in which the computers are so ancient, because remember, I got into the in the late 90s, where concept art is not even a thing, or barely a thing, especially in video games. So oftentimes they give me like the crappiest machine that they don't use anymore. Like all the 3D guys get the best machines. So they give you kind of like some random machine, and it's like it's super slow. Photoshop doesn't have anything in it, but you have to do work, right? You cannot be like, oh, my machine is not good, so please give me the best. They'll be like, who is this person, causing us trouble. So that's just me. So you're welcome to try out new settings and do all sorts of fun stuff, but I'm just used to using default everything. Now, if you want to make your own brush and that draws well, like you cannot find the calligraphy brush or this chalk brush, I show you how to make a very easy drawing brush. Take the default airbrush, right, which is that. Just shrink this down to nothing. Okay, all the settings are the same. Now it makes a beautiful sketch brush. See, I have one here, size 7. Okay, so this is the same. This is just the airbrush. So you can see if I blow it up big, it's an airbrush. Shrink it super small down to pretty much 5 to 7 pixels. It's a beautiful sketch brush. And I know a lot of pros in LA that use this brush to draw. Okay, it's just just airbrush. Again, the reason why these guys do it is because we get into a studio and they give you a locked Photoshop. You just take the airbrush, shrink it small, save as new brush, you're good, right? Because they don't let you open up anything. You can't put USB sticks on there or nothing if you're working in high security areas, okay? So anyways, this is a, if all else fails and the studio don't have any kind of brush I like, I use the default airbrush because it works really well. So, and the reason why I use airbrush is because it flows well. If you use the default hard, which is this one here, right, this is a default hard circle brush that also comes in Photoshop. That's the default hard. This is a default airbrush, right? So if I use this one and shrink it really small, you can see, okay, it's similar. Okay, if I zoom in here, it's similar, but you can see the flow is just not as nice at the end here. So you can see it's a very consistent opacity and drops off very, very fast to none opacity. So versus the airbrush smalls here, that's this one here, the drop off is a little bit better. So it's very slight, but you can feel it when you're on the tablet itself. So I prefer the soft brush. Okay, so that's that. Now to get warmed up, what I often do is let me use my calligraphy brush here. Okay, so the way I like to generally warm up, let me close this as well. If you're gonna sketch, one, get very comfortable in your chair, your seat. Okay, so just relax. If you're wearing kind of jewelry and anything like that, I recommend taking it off. So I'm drawing with my right hand here, so I'm wearing a watch. So if I'm doing this for reals, I'm working, I'll definitely take my watch off because this thing will add a little bit of weight to your wrist. And this is a pretty heavy watch right here as well. So just take it off, you don't need it. Right, so take that off. So if any rings, jewelries, I tend not to have them on as well. So I generally don't wear rings for that reason because it gets in the way of work. So now my entire wrist is free. Now you want to pivot on your elbow. So the way I have my desk set up is that my elbow can always be on the desk. So I don't have my, if I scoot back here, I'm not working like this in which my elbow is floating off the desk. That's gonna put a lot of pressure onto your wrist and your hands because it's getting all the force onto it. Instead, all the force goes to your elbow. So my wacom is kind of further in on the desk. So I like to work a huge desk as a reason. Okay, so that way I'm always very comfortable with my entire body pretty much on the desk and nothing's kind of floating off. So then early on, just try this. Okay, just practice moving your elbow back and forth, which I'm doing here. I'm getting these nice slightly curved lines because that's a natural curve in your body. Okay, and just kind of go across. I don't want to draw this line. See, if I draw this line with my wrist, this is the result. Okay, let me try again. Oh man, that's hard. Okay, that's my best attempt here to draw it. Yeah, okay, look at that. That line's horrible. It's wiggly, it's stiff, it has no life to it because I'm relying on the wrist movement and it kind of bumping along, right? Versus a natural curve of your body, you get these nice flowy lines. Okay, so that's one way to kind of warm up. Okay, sometimes I just draw wiggly lines, like I'll just go in and just draw, for example, let's draw a random branch. Okay, this way there's no pressure and just warms up. So I do this sometimes before I start a job, is just to warm up with random lines that looks kind of cool, like spiky mountains or whatever. It makes no sense. Whatever this thing is, it makes no sense. It's a way for you to warm up the muscles, like literally warming them up. So that way the cells in there starts to come to life. It knows what your body starts to know what you're trying to do. Okay, similar to before you do a workout, you kind of do some warm up exercises so the muscles heats up. So you're using muscles to draw. So you want your what do you call this? Your biceps, your triceps, and your forearm muscles to start to just warm up. Okay, and that's what I generally do with this kind of stuff. Okay, you don't have to save these, are not meant for anything. They don't make any sense. So I draw things like that. Back in art center, I used to draw these flower pots to practice ellipse because back in those days, ellipses are probably some of the hardest forms to draw, and you draw a lot of cars, so they have wheels on them. So I used to warm up by doing this kind of stuff. So they look like 3D jars or something, say like this. So I used to have pages and pages of stuff in my sketchbook, and some of my friends would look at it and have gone, what the heck are you drawing? Like these kind of vases or something. I'm like, dude, this is my warm up. So I used to just do this all the time. I still do today. So just do this. Okay, it kind of gives the because he works out my my elbow to making these small gesture turns like that. Right, so these are connected. I also do things that are not connected. Like this. These are single ellipses one at a time. Yep, like that. So I'm not sure how this will work for, like the reason why I don't like Cintiq is because my elbow floats. I never got used to it. I actually have a few Cintiqs in my house. I just never used it, so I give it out to my teachers and friends and whatnot because I can't get used to it because I'm always floaty. I'm sure you could get used to it, but in what I do nowadays, it's fine. I could just stick with the traditional stuff. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this episode, running into about an hour and 10 minutes here. So hopefully this is a starting of a good, nice series of just basic things. Let me put this on something interesting to look at. Let's put it on the trees. Okay, so hopefully episode 102 will continue down this line for a while because it's fun for me to kind of refresh myself as well, to do these kind of basic things I used to do in art school. And hopefully this is helping some of you as well who are starting to get into this business. So move in the same line as we as difficulty curve, right? So I start with some trees, maybe we'll draw some castles, eventually maybe we'll get to the hardest stuff, but human faces and stuff probably won't do because we don't have to do those kind of things. But we might do some costume design. For example, we take some characters standing there and we worked out their clothing and so forth, but I don't know, and we'll deal with it. So we'll definitely cover some perspective things, some vanishing points, cameras, and all that. So a lot of line drawings coming up, and we'll slowly move into digital painting and so forth. Let's take it one step at a time. Okay, so anyways, I hope you guys enjoy episode 101, and I look forward to see you guys in episode 102. Any questions, comments, leave below, and please help us spread the word and subscribe to our channel. This is Fei Zhu signing off. I'll see you guys soon. Bye bye.